my first Muppet movie was Sesame Street's Follow That Bird. But of course, when I say that, some people in the comments are going to be a little bit unhappy, saying things like, oh, the felted foam puppets created by the Jim Henson Company for Sesame Street aren't technically Muppets, which is not true. Unless you're a Disney lawyer, in which case that's totally true, and I don't claim any rights to the Muppets whatsoever. But Muppets is a pretty broad term, covering just about anything from the earliest Muppets in Sam and Friends, created in the 1950s, to the Sesame Street Muppets, which were started in 1969, to, of course, the Muppet Show Muppets, which is what we most closely associate with the Muppet brand nowadays. I'm not going to go all the way into that history, but Defunctland has an amazing documentary series on the Muppets, which I highly recommend you check out. Anyway, this is October, the spookiest of all months when I'm filming this, so I figure why not talk about the spookiest of all the Muppet movies. That's right, the Muppet Christmas Carol. Actually, what? The Muppet Christmas Carol is an adaptation of The Muppet Show. Are you serious? It's based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. It's right there in the name. Gonzo plays Dickens himself. That's the thing. Gonzo is playing a role. Kermit is playing a role. Sam the Eagle is playing a role. Shh. In the Muppet movie, The Great Muppet Caper and Muppets Take Manhattan, all of the core Muppet cast were themselves. Sure, Kermit and Fozzie could be reporters or recently graduated college students, but they were always Kermit and Fozzie. This is the first time where that isn't the case. What defines a Muppet movie? Muppets? But it's not just that. You can't put Muppets in a show and call it a Muppet show. I think you can, and a little thing called The Muppet Show agrees with me. I hope you're not going to be so gauche as to pass me off as a Muppet. I wouldn't dare. The Muppets are owned by Disney now, and I do not have the budget to fight their legal team. You are a generic, foam, hand and rod, single performer puppet. Plus, you made me out of literal garbage. So you're just using me as a fake person to have conversations with. What are you, Natalie Wynn? Anyway, back to the Muppets. The Muppet Christmas Carol was the first Muppet movie filmed after the death of Jim Henson. And it started what I like to consider the post-Henson Muppet period, which lasted from the early 90s when Henson died to the early 2000s when Disney acquired the Muppets as they own them now. It didn't even bother to give me 2 arms. I am trying to make a video essay here. Can you quit it with the hijinks? But that's my point. The hijinks are what makes the Muppet Show the Muppet Show. Sure, there's a variety show with sketches and musical numbers, but the actual show is about them putting on the show. It's not the Muppet Show without backstage hijinks like Miss Piggy being a diva, or Gonzo trying to get Kermit to sign off on whatever his ridiculous plan of the week is. Fozzie being heckled by the Statler and Waldorf only works because it takes place in the theater's audience rather than being confined to the stage. Can we talk about how it's weird that Miss Piggy is the only core cast member that's a woman? I mean, we could, but doesn't it come off a bit hypocritical? It's not like you have a lot of female characters in this thing. There's only 2 characters in this, you and me. So, why didn't you make me a woman? Did you even consider it? Well, of course I considered it. I would never have written this bit if I hadn't considered it, at least. Seems like you should really get your own house in order before criticizing the gender politics of the Muppets. I'm never going to get this video done. Muppet Christmas Carol opens with a beautiful long tracking shot over the rooftops of Victorian London. There! Look at the opening credits. For the first time in any Muppet movie, the opening credits list the Muppets as performers. We don't see Frank Oz as Fozzie the Bear. We have Fozzie the Bear as Fozziewig. That's because they didn't want to show that Kermit was being played by a new performer. You see, Steve Whitmire took over the role after Jim Henson's death, and if you'd let me get to the point I'm making in this video, I would be able to tell the audience that Henson's ghost, alongside the other spirits, is haunting this film. But they don't have to list the performers at all. The first 3 Muppet movies, they didn't do that. Well, maybe they didn't want people to be confused when Kermit shows up as Bob Cratchit. Sure, that could be, but this goes one step further than that. When we see Kermit the Frog credited as playing Bob Cratchit, we believe that next to Michael Caine playing Scrooge. We accept it at face value because the previous 3 films and the original Muppet Show did the work of convincing us that Kermit the Frog is an established character. They've already done the work of establishing him as a real person. But he's not a real person. He's a Muppet. think we should go to Kermit the Frog to answer that one.
Oh, that's okay. I'm not a puppet. I'm a Muppet.
Oh, what's the difference?
Well, a puppet is actually controlled by a person, whereas I am an actual talking frog.
Oh.
Yeah.
So the first time in any of the Muppet movies, we have the Muppets doing what they did in the Muppet Show. They're playing pots. And more important than that is the fact that who each Muppet is brings something to the role they play. Kermit is Bob Cratchit, a kindly man who's been beaten down by the world, just like on the Muppet Show where he is constantly being harangued by the hijinks the rest of the cast are getting up to. And of course he's married to Miss Piggy's character, referencing their long-standing but very complicated relationship that the two of them have had years before this movie. Fozzie, of course, is Fozziewig, because how could you not pass up on that pun? And then you have Gonzo as Charles Dickens himself. Who better to play someone who is outside the fiction, but able to comment on and influence it than the Muppets' own resident weirdo? I thought Gonzo was an alien. Muppets from Space came out 7 years after this movie, so that hadn't been established yet. And that's just the first of 127 reasons why Gonzo is not an alien. Would you like me to read the rest of the list?
I'd prefer if you didn't. But what about the backstage stuff? You never see Kermit or Michael Caine breaking character or being outside of the movie. Even Gonzo is always in character as Charles Dickens.
You got me there. Everyone is playing someone else, except for one little thing. One little spanner in the works. One little piece of grit in the gears.
Get on with it.
You wrote the lines. Rizzo. Rizzo the Rat isn't playing anybody else. He's just Rizzo. He's even credited as playing himself. And thus, with one little rat in the punch bowl, the entire illusion is shattered. Rizzo's presence serves the same purpose as the backstage scenes in the Muppet Show. He can comment on the action while still being connected to it. Rizzo is not part of the story, but he interacts with the story through Gonzo/Dickens, who serves as a bridge between our world, represented by Rizzo, and Dickens' world, represented by everything else.
That seems like a bit of a stretch. Gonzo and Rizzo comment on the story, but they're also very clearly part of the story's universe the whole time. Actions that the characters take affect both of them. Rizzo is constantly eating things in the world, and Gonzo's narration is implied to directly impact the story.
Ebenezer Scrooge. You will meet him as he comes around that corner.
Where?
There.
When?
Now. To conduct a proper search, Scrooge was forced to light the lamps.
How does he do that?
Sure, Rizzo is a rat, but he could be one of the thousands, if not millions, of Victorian rats living in London at this point in time.
But he's not one of those rats. We see those rats, for example, working with Bob Cratchit at Scrooge's business. They don't know they're in a story. Rizzo is the only person who hears Gonzo as Dickens directly address the audience. By existing outside the story while still being in the world, Rizzo acts as an audience surrogate, asking the questions that the audience can't. He's that pesky kid watching the movie with you who keeps asking questions, what's going on? Who's that? Why are they singing? But you're getting me off my original point.
Your point? Whose video essay is this?
My point was, having the Muppets, established characters in their own right, play these characters, adds another layer of meaning to the story. For example, we know who Statler and Waldorf are, and we bring that knowledge with us when we see them performing as the Marley Brothers. In the original story, Marley comes back to threaten Scrooge with knowledge beyond the grave, and Statler and Waldorf do that, but add their trademark style of jokes to the process. And that connection between character and the Muppet performers is further enhanced when we see the living Marleys heckling Fozziewig during Scrooge's trip to Christmas past.
It is a tradition for me to make a little speech.
And it's a tradition for us to take a little nap.
Fezziwig and the Marleys fall into roles of performer and hecklers, which the audience is ready to accept because we know the Muppet performers in these roles. The Muppet Christmas Carol managed to do something that almost no other adaptation manages to do.
What's that?
They bring something new to the story without diminishing the original. The movie is surprisingly faithful to the original text. Gonzo as Dickens actually quotes the story multiple times in his narration, and much of the dialogue is lifted wholesale.
Why do you doubt your senses?
Because a little thing can affect them. A slight disorder of the stomach can make them cheat. You may be a bit of undigested beef, a blob of mustard, a crumb of cheese. Yes. There's more of gravy than of grave about you.
Of course, quoting a text directly doesn't necessarily mean a faithful adaptation. Just look at Zack Snyder's Watchmen. But in this case, it works to make one of the absolute best adaptations of A Christmas Carol. I thought you said this was an adaptation of The Muppet Show? It can be two things. And that clip of Michael Caine is as good as any place as any to mention his role in all of this. Scrooge. Don't be smart. How many humans are in a given episode of The Muppet Show? Does Scooter count? No, Scooter's a gopher.
I'm a new gopher. Yeah, I'll go for coffee, I'll go for sandwiches, I'll go for anything you need.
Then 1. Each week there's a different guest star. And how many humans are in The Muppet Christmas Carol? There's Scrooge, his nephew Fred, Belle, the woman he loves and loses. Then, of course, there's a bunch of humans at Fred's Christmas party, not to mention, dozens of people walking the streets in various crowd scenes. Oh, that's actually more than I remembered. Sorry. No, I can work with this. So putting aside the extras in the crowd scene, because they don't really count as characters, and the humans at the Christmas party, we could reasonably say they're Fred's family. So all the humans are related to each other? What about Belle? Belle is a bit tricky. We might have to chalk her up to the creative team deciding that having Scrooge fall in love with a Muppet would be really awkward. Well, you don't think it worked in Howard the Duck? No. So if we eliminate all the characters who aren't Scrooge, we end up with a film where Scrooge is the only human character? Exactly. I'm actually willing to get on board with that. One of the reasons Muppet Treasure Island doesn't work as well is because they cast humans as both Long John Silver and Young Jim, which means in this ostensibly Muppet movie, you have whole scenes without any Muppets in them. Exactly! Christmas Carol manages to replicate the feeling of the original Muppet Show, having a guest star appear in multiple skits with different Muppets over the course of an episode. Yeah! Before all this, the Muppet movies had a cavalcade of cameos, from Steve Martin to Orson Welles to Madeline Kahn to John Cleese and Peter Falk, from Joan Rivers to Brooke Shields. But none of those people would be considered to be starring in the movie. But here, Michael Caine is the star. So we've got all the hallmarks of an episode of The Muppet Show. A single guest star featured prominently, metafictional staging with backstage antics commenting on the narrative, and the Muppets as cast members playing roles rather than themselves. All right, you've convinced me. I should hope so. It's your hand up my butt. Didn't we establish you don't have a butt? I don't have legs. That's not the same thing. Sure it is. Butt is legs. No. We are not going down that path. You're forgetting one final thing. Oh, am I? The spirit of experimentation. Don't you mean the experimentation with the spirits? That too. Brian Henson mentioned on the DVD commentary that they originally planned to have the 3 spirits that visit Scrooge be played by established Muppet characters. The Ghost of Christmas Past was going to be played by Scooter, the Spirit of Christmas Present was Miss Piggy, and the Spirit of Christmas Yet to Come was going to be played by Gonzo the Great. That would have been a very different film. I agree, and so did the creative team. They decided that it would undermine the story to have these established characters, so they had to come up with all new puppets to play these spirits. And that allowed them to embrace the spirit of experimentation that drove Jim Henson through all of his productions. Henson canceled The Muppet Show after 5 seasons at the peak of popularity because he wanted to go on and do new things. He was always looking for new ways to do something interesting with puppets and filmmaking in general. From Kermit singing and playing the banjo in the swamp at the beginning of the Muppet movie, to the entire cast of the Muppets riding bicycles simultaneously in Muppets Take Manhattan. He was always looking for ways to do things bigger and harder and more complexly. For example, The Spirit of Christmas Past was filmed by submerging the puppet in a tank of baby oil and filming it in front of a green screen so they could give her that ethereal floating quality that is just so impactful. That's something that had never happened in the Muppet world before, but it combines so many things that Henson loved to play with, from camera tricks to new ways of puppeteering to just surprising the audience at every turn. And that's where the Muppets shine the most, when they're trying new things, when they're doing things the hard way rather than the easy way to get the desired effect. Is that a dig at everything the Muppets have put out since 2011? Oh, would you look at that, we're out of time.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing if you did that. Thanks for commenting if you did that. Thanks for clicking the bell if you did that, liking. I don't know if there's anything else YouTube says I'm supposed to tell you to do, but do all the things, please. It really does mean a lot to me. Thanks, as always, to Dr. Amy Gunther for editing the script for this piece. She makes me sound much smarter than I actually am. And if you'd like to hear her talking to me, you can always listen to our podcast, 5 Degrees Between Us, where we share our first impressions of different movies and other media that we have recently watched. Hey, wait a minute. How come you get the big final line? I did most of the work on this one. Yeah, but it's my show, not yours. Plus, your eyeline was like all over the place. Yeah, but I got an idiot puppeteering me. What's your excuse? Bye! Kid watching the movie with you keeps asking questions. Hey, what's going on? What's my arm doing up here? Puppeteering is hard work. Puppeteering is hard work. If you didn't know, puppeteering is hard work.